On the 29th of November 1947, the United Nations General Assembly resolved that British-mandated Palestine should be partitioned into a Jewish state and an Arab state.
Soviet Union, yes. United Kingdom, abstain. The United States, yes.
The resolution of the DUC Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
The Jews accepted the partition resolution. The Arabs rejected it out of hand and went to war instead. Fighting started the very next day. Many Jews died in these convoys, taking vital supplies to Jerusalem. The actual War of Independence started in May 1948.
There's a document by the Arab League to the United Nations saying, yes, we have invaded this country to reverse something which is absolutely unacceptable. And so they basically went to war against the UN resolution, which is quite an interesting fact, but it is a fact.
General Assembly resolutions are not binding, according to the UN Charter, under international law. It was a recommendation. If it had been accepted by both the Jewish people and the Arab people, then a treaty would have been prepared reflecting this partition. That would have been binding. But those who suggest that today, whatever is being discussed in terms of the terms of a peace plan, that one should be complying with what was proposed in the partition resolution, disregards the fact that binding resolutions from the UN do not come from the General Assembly.
Apart from the fact that binding UN resolutions do not come from the General Assembly, the Arab rejection of the partition plan effectively made it null and void. What UN Resolution 181 had recommended was the partition of Palestine into Jewish and Arab states according to this map. What is interesting is that the city of Jerusalem, along with Bethlehem, was to have the status of being a corpus separatum. In other words, it was to be under international control.
Jerusalem was not to be a part of the Arab state under the partition resolution. It wasn't to be in the Jewish state. It was to be set aside. An international zone was going to be created. And after 10 years, there was going to be a referendum. According to many Jewish leaders who were involved in the acceptance of the principles of the partition resolution, the expectation was that since there was already a Jewish majority in Jerusalem in 1947, that after the Jewish state was created and doors to further immigration were open, that there would be a significant majority of Jewish people in Jerusalem, and the referendum would result in the attachment of Jerusalem to the Jewish state. That was the expectation.
That expectation never came to pass because of Jordan's illegal invasion and seizure of what became known as East Jerusalem. The War of Independence continued until March 1949, when armistice agreements were signed between Israel and her enemies. More than 6,000 Israelis had been killed. That was about 1% of the whole Jewish population. 2,000 of them were survivors of the Holocaust. The 1949 armistice lines left Egypt occupying Gaza and Jordan occupying Judea and Samaria, which the Jordanian government renamed as the West Bank of the Jordan River within the Kingdom of Jordan. The Jordanian occupation also included the eastern part of Jerusalem. The armistice lines, otherwise known as the Green Line, were not to be regarded as international borders.
The Green Line, which is simply a line on the map drawn with a green marker by Moshe Dayan when he was the chief of staff in 1949, when they were negotiating the armistice agreements, signified the armistice line, the line where Israel's forces reached on the day that the ceasefire was declared. And in the armistice agreement with Jordan, The Jordanians insisted on putting in a provision saying that the armistice demarcation line cannot, under any circumstances, be considered to be an international boundary.
The exact language of the Israel-Jordan Armistice Agreement, for example, signed in 1949, typifies all of the armistice agreements. The basic purpose of the armistice demarcation lines is to delineate the lines beyond which the armed forces of the respective parties shall not move, as agreed upon by the parties, without prejudice to future territorial settlements or boundary lines or to claims of either party relating thereto.
In 1949, the government of Israel officially declared the part of Jerusalem that wasn't illegally occupied by the Kingdom of Jordan to be the capital of the State of Israel. Israel's national parliament, the Knesset, was established in what became known politically as West Jerusalem. The Knesset's permanent home has been situated here since 1966. Most of the government departments are nearby, including the Prime Minister's office, the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as Israel's Supreme Court. The official residence of both the Prime Minister and the President of Israel are also here in Jerusalem. In other words, the seat of government of the State of Israel is located here in Jerusalem and has been for around 3/4 of a century.
There's not really international law on capital cities per se. One might say there is a customary practice with respect to the recognition of a state's own selection of its capital city. Whether that falls under international relations or international law may be debatable. Nevertheless, it's fairly clear that countries have free rein to designate any part of their territory as their capital. And in practice, countries have their capitals at the seat of their government, and that is generally where other countries will locate their diplomatic missions, so as to be in easy contact with the government of the host country.
Jerusalem, it is the administrative center of the land. Even when the British took over in Mandate times, they knew where to put their head offices in Jerusalem. It wasn't Haifa or Tel Aviv, so naturally it is the administrative center of the country, and historically that's been the case, but it was only the Jews who made it the capital of an independent nation here in all the centuries of Jerusalem's history.
However, the former mandatory power, Great Britain, refused to recognize it as Israel's capital. Many other nations followed suit. The fact that the Jordanian invasion and seizure of the historic Jewish capital with its holy sites was illegal under international law and a violation of the United Nations Charter was deliberately ignored. Another universal legal principle concerning Israel's borders was also ignored and still is to this day.
There is a fundamental rule of customary international law that establishes the borders of newly emerging states at independence, as in Israel's case, in 1948. It's universally applied in the 19th century. It was applied in South America. Later, it was applied in Africa and Asia, and still later at the disintegration of the former communist federations. And really in all cases involving mandates, this was the default rule for all states emerging from these administrative areas. The universal rule for determining the borders of newly emerging states at the moment of independence dictates that a new state takes on the boundaries of the pre-existing administrative unit as its international borders. The rule is called uti possidetis juris. So Israel, as the only state to emerge from that mandate territory in 1948, automatically assumed as its recognized borders the administrative lines of the mandate, and that includes East Jerusalem and what was later called the West Bank, which was occupied by Jordan from Israel in the 1948-49 Independence War. The legal status of that territory, applying this universal rule, is that Israel has been the sovereign since 1948.
The Arab invasion of Israel in 1948 and the run-up to it had another serious consequence, which is a political hot potato today, some 70 years later, the refugee problem.
In May 1948, what is happening? Well, Israel's been invaded, it's an aggressive war by Arab states, so a war is now going on. Inevitably, when a war is being fought, population often want to get out of the way. So number one is that natural desire. Who started the war? The Arabs did. So is Israel to blame for these refugees that go out?
Arab refugees were created only as a result of Arab rejection of partition, and especially their rejection of the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in the land. Had the Arabs accepted partition, had they accepted the United Nations proposal to divide the land into a Jewish state and an Arab state, as it was defined, no one would have been displaced at all. Everyone would have stayed where they were.
The Arabs in Palestine are being told, you can leave now, get out of the way, let the armies, let the Egyptian army and Jordanian army, let them do the work. And then when you come back, you can have all the property that belonged to the Jews when we've wiped them out. And the Arab Higher Committee, which was the central body for the Palestinian Arabs, was making this, saying you must do it.
It is true that the Israelis expelled some Arabs, but they were mainly those in frontline areas and who were known to be cooperating with the enemy. But they were only a small percentage of those Arabs who became displaced. This is only the beginning of the story concerning the Palestinian Arab refugees. And as I said earlier, the political ramifications continue to this day. In the next episode of Whose Land, we look at Israel's victory in 1967 when attacked by Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. In defending itself, Israel recaptured the territory from which it was expelled in 1948, and more. We examine the legal ramifications of that amazing victory.